Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Healthy Indoors Live Show. I'm your host, Bob Krell. I'm the founder and publisher of Healthy Indoors Magazine, and I'll be your tour guide for the next 60 minutes here. Great show today, really great show. We're going to be speaking really about the issues in our schools in this country, which have always been near and dear to me as an indoor environmental consultant. So to that end, with us today, we're joined by Claire Barnett. She's the founder and executive director of the Healthy Schools Network. She grew it from its roots in New York City to the nation's premier voice for children's environmental health at schools by advancing a comprehensive policy agenda, fostering state and local government health coalitions across the country, and securing landmark reforms in states and federally. She's been a social entrepreneur. She previously reported for Time Magazine in New York City. She administered rural New York health services and assisted the Adirondack Park communities with sustainable development. She shifted her focus to children's environmental health in the aftermath of her child's pesticide exposure at school. And I've known Claire for a long time. She's been a very strong voice and advocate in this space, and great to have you here, Claire. Also
Thank you.
joining
Great
us
to be
is
here.
Mansell Nelson. He, for 22 years, has served with the Institute for Tribal Environmental Professionals, the ITEP, which is hosted at Northern Arizona University. Mansell's formal education included chemistry and chemical engineering. Prior to his service with the Northern Arizona University, Mansell served in the U.S. Army Chemical Corps for 14 years and taught community-based chemistry on the Navajo Nation for 6 years. As program director, Mansell's mission is to help prepare Native American students for careers involving the application of science, mathematics, science, and technology to issues impacting tribal communities such as healthy homes, clean air, and clean water. He's also the lead instructor for the Indoor Air Quality Healthy Homes, Healthy Schools courses provided by ITEP. So welcome, everybody. It's great to have you here. Also joining us, of course, is our co-host, Joe Medosh, healthy building scientist with Hayward Score, and our moderator, Susan Valenti, who is the editor of Healthy Indoors Magazine. So, and also welcome to our live virtual studio audience. Great to see you all here today. First half of the show, we'll be dealing with our guests, and then we'll give you the opportunity to turn your cameras on and pose some live questions to us today. So, great. Anyway, this the timing of the show is not totally by coincidence, right? We have healthy National Healthy Schools Day coming up next week, and National Healthy Schools Week. So I guess the first thing we should probably get into is what is that all about? Claire, I'll have you give us just kind of an overview for our audience of what the foundations of that are, what are we trying to achieve, and tell us a little more about it.
Sure. Well, thanks so much. This is a great opportunity to talk a little bit more about indoor air in a very specific kind of way. Healthy Schools Network is 26 years old in January. We celebrated with a national summit talking about COVID, climate, children, and schools. And that's really a perfect storm of multiple disasters, as well as a great opportunity looking ahead. National Healthy Schools Day was something we established really on a total shoestring in about 2002, because this is our 19th year. And we saw a lot of vendors interested in working with schools, and not all of them had great ideas in our view. So we put together a short list of things that we thought made a healthy school, about 10 items, I think, at that point in time. And we used that as sort of the first launch of National Healthy Schools Day. Our goal has never been to have just one activity taking place that everybody could participate in person or remotely on any one day. The real goal was to get lots of people all over the place doing just one thing, a simple thing or a big thing. It was easier a few years ago before the pandemic, to be inside schools, talking to boards, doing a presentation, doing a health fair, something like that. It's gotten harder recently because of more security issues than there were 10 or 15 years ago. So the event has morphed along with the times, but each year there's a particular theme. This year, the theme is Build Back Better, Clean Air in Every School. And we feel pretty strongly about that. It began a year ago when we saw CDC issue the first ever guidance on the pandemic in February of 2020. There were some problems with that. There were some actual factual errors in it. And that started us off to take a look at things that needed to happen last year for National Healthy Schools Day, which is our first pandemic year. And now we're looking at the second pandemic anniversary of National Healthy Schools Day. So that's a little bit of what's going on. And we really appreciate the chance to talk about healthy schools and clean air in every school.
Well, we've been happy to support your efforts over our past 8 years with Healthy Indoors Magazine. So really looking forward to discussing more about, the specifics on the upcoming week's events and how people can get more involved. So Mansell, tell us a little bit about ITEP. That might be unfamiliar to some people.
I'm sure it is. We have a saying in our office, we're better known in the remote villages of Alaska than we are in Flagstaff, and that probably applies to our audience today. ITEP, we call it ITEP. It's the Institute for Tribal Environmental Professionals. We serve the 574 federally recognized tribes around the nation, from Alaska, where about half of them are, all the way to the East Coast. And I have multiple roles at the Institute, but I focus on kids, schools, teachers. As a former classroom teacher, I spent a lot of time in a classroom that was inadequate in many ways, and very sensitive to the needs of our teachers and students. I myself have asthma, and so I'm a pretty good biological detector, can tell you if our indoor spaces have problems. And my experience in schools over the last 20 years of visiting schools across the nation, tribal schools, I can say that a lot of our schools have problems even before we were concerned about the pandemic.
Well, there are other facts that go deep in there, and that is that tribal communities, Native Americans, actually have a higher rate of asthma on the population in general. So not only you're challenged with an environment, you're challenged with a population that's predisposed maybe to their environment, but just in general, your numbers are always been higher. We look at the national averages, so it is a double whammy on those types of areas and communities. And now, we also watched how they got really devastated with their conditions through COVID. It wasn't the national news, but if you were paying attention, you saw that some of those areas were had a lot of quick spread and had very little ability to control that or have the kind of funds to do that. So I applaud what you're doing.
It's one of the tough factors about schools is that the population in schools has changed over the years. Currently, of the 51, it's about 51 million children in public schools today. About 25% of them, according to the National Association of School Nurses, have pre-existing chronic conditions. A lot of that is asthma, some of it is diabetes, some of it, there are a range of difficulties. The other thing that we know about schools, and I'll share this just so how we frame the issue of schools and children. We know that biologically children are not just little adults. They breathe more air per pound of body weight, more vulnerable to environmental health hazards. By the same token, just the way kids aren't little adults, schools are not just little offices. They're really not. They are structurally different, and what happens inside is definitely different. The occupants are 95% women and children, which are vulnerable subsets of the population. So you start talking about all, the chemical stew that consists of indoor air, there are a lot of things to think about.
Well, and that raises the point. We're laser focused on maybe the indoor environments at this point due to the pandemic, but these IAQ problems in schools, this is nothing new. I've been a consultant for 35 years, and schools have been one of the areas that we've spent a lot of time over these years. Let's just jump into a little bit of a little more descriptive of some of the problems that have been faced in schools in the U.S. and certainly Mansell, in the indigenous communities. I mean, it seems like those are some of the worst schools I've seen in my career. At least on the East Coast.
Yeah, I want to paint the picture. Let's go back to when we were in 3rd or 4th grade and realize that the door was closed due to sound, windows were closed due to sound, and the teacher wanted to be able to talk clearly. So a lot of people breathing and very, very poor conditions inside. So just remember that that's the environment that we're now talking about. So yeah.
Yes,
Well, the old way to look
pre-pandemic.
at, the old way of looking at an environment was, once upon a time, dirty outside air was the miasma in the 1800s that caused illness in people. And then there were different ways to build buildings then. In New York City, it was called, quote unquote, cathedrals of learning, which is sort of politically incorrect today. But those are the buildings with great facades and names of famous people on the front and tall windows that open top and bottom. The goal of that was natural ventilation and daylight. They worked.
Mansell, you had
Yeah.
a point.
I'm just going to say that pre-pandemic, our tribal schools tend to be underfunded and many times deferred maintenance, particularly during the recession. As I visited schools, this was, early 2000s. I saw schools that literally shut down their ventilation because they could not afford to heat or cool their school. So yeah, pre-pandemic, we already had significant issues with ventilation, with cleaning practices. Earlier, we talked about asthma rates for our Native Americans. Typically, we're looking at almost double the asthma rates amongst Native Americans. So that creates a much greater problem when you come to air quality issues in our schools.
Mm-hmm.
So let's try to, I know we all think this and we forget to do it sometimes, that we're able to easily identify all of the challenges, the issues, the problems, and the impacts, and it's now not just like cognitive challenges or some minor emotional challenge. What kids have gone through now is an extreme emotional impact from, the paranoia or the nightmares that will probably haunt them for a long time. Let's shift to some positive recommendations. So Claire, why don't you go next? Why don't you tell us what's your recommendations for many of these schools, especially on a tight budget? What are your here's some things you should be focused on. Get your engineering team to be thinking about this. Figure out how to budget for these kind of things, later this year and even to next. So what are your top few recommendations for these schools?
Well, I would start with ventilation. That's one of the consistent things I saw across schools as I visited schools, again, across the nation. New schools, old schools, it didn't really matter. Ventilation the schools were always underventilated. In some situations, I'd find that maintenance directors made conscious choices that they knew that increasing ventilation with outside air had higher costs, and they were in a cost-saving mode. So they would clamp down on open air. So universally, I would say that ventilation, bringing in outside air, whether it's through your HVAC, through windows, or however you can do it, is a key message I would want to get out to all school administrators.
That's been a problem since pre-pandemic too, right? I mean,
Yeah.
ventilation, in my experience in 35 years, has been an ongoing school nightmare, really, everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's true. And I think that EPA has had a longstanding program on indoor air quality in schools for a long time. The budget was slashed out from under it about 10 years ago. And it's really unfortunate that in this last 8-10 year period of time, there's been so little attention to school indoor air, because at this point in time, we know that it's an airborne virus, and we know that everybody needs to have fresh air in the buildings. And I think the ASHRAE recommendation is 4 to 6 air changes an hour. I'm not sure that, there's school systems all over the country that aren't doing 2, probably. I'm thinking of the City of Philadelphia school system, where we've had some work relationships over the years. The last information I had were last fall. None of the buildings have working ventilation systems, and all the windows are closed. Buildings leak like a sieve because they're coming apart. But in terms of functional systems, there isn't one. And so one of the questions might be, how do you get the window open? Can you chisel it open? And
Right.
What do you then cover it up with? Do you put bars or screens, or what's your security mechanism? Another is to plug in a portable HEPA air cleaner in a classroom. And then the question is, do you have sufficient power capacity or electrical capacity in a very old building with damp walls to plug in a lot of devices all at once and run them 18 hours a day? I think there are a lot of huge questions that, frankly, as much as I admire the folks at CDC, I don't think they thought things through thoroughly on some of the most rural or some of the most impacted urban school systems when they were producing their guidance.
Here in Colorado, they were very active because the University of Colorado is very active. So they were opening windows and kids just had to leave their coats on all day long because the compromise was you got fresh air, but I can't actually heat this room anymore. So it was a challenge that, pick one, either you're, you're comfortable and you probably have poor indoor air quality, or let's bring in some fresh air, but there is a temperature challenge that goes along with that. So
Right.
I do want to point out that your concept of adding HEPA filtration, people will buy a small room air purifier that's designed to do a part of that room. They're not really investing in 4 of them, nor are they putting them in the kind of middle of the room. They're putting them over in the corner as though thinking that that corner of that classroom that's empty is going to help the entire room, and they need to figure out a way to, rearrange their room so those are kind of in the middle without
Right. Well,
having
there's
trip
a
hazards. Yeah.
sized, right, clean air delivery rate, CADR listing on the air cleaners, right? So
But I don't know, maybe Bob knows, but it's somebody else in the audience. There is, I don't know of a one that actually is efficient for an entire classroom. 2 may get you by. Yeah.
The problem is it's not just a matter of even CFM, right? The airflow rates on these devices, it's location, right? Because you're trying to get some form of mixing in airflow, and that's where it becomes problematic to drop a portable air cleaner in, let's say, a classroom environment. Portable air cleaners work out great. I've had one in my bedroom for 15 years. In a residential setting, they're real easy to locate, not a problem. You usually have enough outlets. But in a school setting, now you've got to get this thing somewhere, located in the room where you're not tripping people on extension cords. And it's not to say it shouldn't happen, because I think there's a lot of validity to putting these portable devices in these rooms. And even like Joe, you mentioned having it over in a corner. That's not ideal, but that's still better than not having one in the room at all, because there still is some impact, even if it's not properly located or optimally located. Still having HEPA filtration, it's still doing some air cycles, and it's making
If I was a teacher, I would have one on my desk, because it'd be up where I'm breathing. It's kind of an obstacle.
If I was a teacher, I'd have myself in a bubble, but that's another story.
Well, I think it's been really difficult to reopen schools. I know CDC has published a number of different studies out of several states looking at, who's successful and why they're successful. But a lot of those haven't really pulled up the information about ventilation and cleaning practices at the same time. So it's there are a lot of variables here in terms of indoor air. So I think it's been difficult to get all of that. Part of it is nobody actually tracks school facilities and what they're doing. Unless
you just mentioned a side note in the
right,
cleaning,
unless every once in a while there's a GAO report. There was GAO in June of last year, 2020, on ventilation. Well, more broadly, problems in schools and what systems are working. What was it, 36,000 estimate of HVAC systems that need to be replaced or updated. Those are just people who had systems.
You mentioned a side note of the cleaning products that we're to kind of focus on keeping the virus at bay. But, every night these things are being, hosed down, scrubbed, fogged, adding chemicals that we've never seen in our history. And then the students now come into these, secondary exposures that we haven't even begun to think about. How do you get rid of those constant chemicals that they're now being exposed to? So there's multiple layers here that we really haven't thought through as to what's the long-term impact for these younger people.
We've worked on cleaning in schools for almost 20 years, and I think one of the things that came out of that was a number of different states, including New York State, where we're based, requiring all public and private schools actually to do third-party certified general purpose cleaning products. It's one step to reducing the chemical load inside, because they do reduce hazard, particularly asthmagens. And the same thing is true as disinfectants. There are disinfectants on the EPA N list, the N list, which is good for SARS-CoV-2. which are actually a little safer, and they have less impact on human health, but they're effective against the virus. So it's important to look for those. A great friend of ours, a friend of Healthy Schools Network, is a responsible purchasing network that does a lot of work with state municipal green procurement programs. And I know they culled the end list for preferred disinfectants, and Green Seal has done the same thing. So there's good advice out there, and part of it is don't use a fogger and don't use an electrostatic sprayer.
So Mansell, you deal, and your network deals with a lot of underfunded school facilities, right? And school facilities that I'm assuming really weren't in great shape prior to this pandemic. I mean, you're already starting from a place that's not desirable. How much has this really been, has this pandemic compounded the situations that you have?
Well, a lot of the tribal schools are still not convening, not having students in the school building as of yet. But many of the tribal schools are in rural communities. They've been underfunded for a long time. I remember that shortly after my stint as a classroom teacher, we hit the recession and people were talking about, well, we're reducing staff, and they were specifically reducing custodial staff. And they kept saying, we're going to keep our academic programs strong. But it quickly became apparent to me, visiting schools around the nation, that that the reduction in custodial staff was having very detrimental effects on the overall building and structure, and particularly in the tribal schools where there's funding shortages, and the students are often already in home environments that are less healthy, and then they come to school and it's even worse sometimes. There's actually been times when I'd visit a school and after a few minutes I'd have to leave because my asthma was kicking in. I remember one case where I went immediately to the superintendent's office and told him, you've got a sick building here. And he looked at me a little annoyed and he said, well, write me a report. So I grabbed a piece of paper off his desk and said, you have a sick building, and signed it. He was not impressed. But a few weeks later, after we gave him all the data about lack of ventilation and the illness of his students, they finally took some actions to improve the air quality in that school. But between lack of knowledge, lack of custodial staff, lack of money, resulting in a lot of deferred maintenance, some of the schools are in pretty poor shape. But more recently, there have been some investments. Federal government has been investing in rebuilding some of the schools. State governments likewise have acknowledged that they have a responsibility for schools that are serving Native American students. But some communities are really lacking and others are doing better.
Let's change gears and talk a little bit about the American Rescue
Wait, I want to
Plan.
get one point in before you change gears a bit. Okay. So many people have been tuned into Joseph Allen. He's the national figurehead of a lot of stuff out of Harvard University, Chan Medical School. And he does have this one great concept, which I've tried to use for residential, and that is, he says that the building facilitators that are that make sure that your rooms are clean and ventilated probably have more impact than your actual physician. And when you think about it, the thing that actually impacts you the most is your environment, which probably does impact you more, or sends you to the doctor, or makes you think about why those things. So when they say they're laying off that kind of staff, or they're making alterations, that's not a priority. They're not realizing how much they're impacting the student's health and ultimately lead them back to a physician. So that is something that we should keep in mind.
And
that those
ultimately,
people,
test scores and attendance.
Well, I think
they've
it's
shown that cognitive issues based on that stuff too.
Well, it's also good to point out that it's not like there was an abundance of overstaffing to begin with. I mean, it's like, we've neglected the infrastructure of our maintenance departments in schools across the board, right? And certainly and a lot of, especially in the urban areas. But with the American Rescue Plan, there's been funds that have been specifically earmarked to help improve schools.
Yes.
Well,
they're allowable uses. They're not set asides for facilities or buildings and grounds. So For everybody,
There's a big
American
difference there too, and what you need to explain
that,
the
yeah,
difference there.
yeah.
The being
Yeah.
a set aside
So-
versus.
So American Rescue Plan, called ARP, is sending $128 billion to public schools, K-12 public schools across the country. It's all divided out by state. If you go to the U.S. Department of Education website, you can see the state by state allocations. Within it, there's some set aside. So about 122 of the 128 are more open. Some of it reserved for learning loss, some of it for special education, some of it, there are a couple of set asides. So the rest of the money can be used for multiple purposes. So there's a long list of allowable uses of these funds. And so that includes school facility repairs to address the virus and environmental health hazards. It includes inspecting, testing, maintenance, and repairs and upgrades to HVAC systems. And it includes something which is pretty vague to me, strategic implementation of public health protocols, like something like masking and cleaning, I think. But those are only allowable uses. Nobody actually has to do that, which brings us full circle as to why we're celebrating with clean air in every school for National Healthy Schools Day. So if any of these have been tied down, if, for example, the school facility repairs and environmental health hazards had been allotted, say, $20 billion or $10 billion, that would have been explicitly stated, and that money would have been reserved for that purpose. But nowhere is any of that money reserved for explicit purposes of dealing with buildings and grounds kinds of issues. So one of the things I think that the previous conversation made me think about is, in our view, and I don't know how many people share this, school buildings are a little bit like the tragedy of the commons. Everybody uses it, but nobody's responsible for the whole area itself. The other is that schools are really knowledge hierarchies, right? And they put high value on book learning. And typically they don't put a lot of value on people who work with their hands. And that's part, I think, of what's happening to school buildings, is the work that's done by people who work with their hands is not as highly valued as somebody's teaching intermediate Latin or chemistry or third grade reading, for that matter. So I think when it comes to how money will be spent, there's a lot of small p politics that take place in local school districts. I think community pressure, parent pressure to make sure that there is ventilation in school. I think teacher unions, if they can do it, they have a lot of issues on their plates, clearly, in a pandemic. But I think everybody who can push on indoor air quality in schools, this is the best time to do it.
At this point, we're hitting the halfway mark. We're just about 30 seconds out. So I'm going to ask our virtual studio audience, you're all invited to turn on your cameras now, and I'd encourage you to do so. Still keep your microphones muted at this point. If you'd like to ask a question, raise your hand, and Susan Valenti, our moderator, will give you the floor and let you ask questions. So by all means, turn your cameras on anyway, so we can all see your lovely faces. Follow up to that.
Remind them where to do the.
Oh yeah. I guess we should explain that, assuming that everybody knows where it is. At the bottom of your control bar, if you're in our virtual studio audience and the actual Zoom meeting here, there's a reactions tab. If you click on that, there's a button to raise your hand, and you hit raise hand button, and Susan will recognize that. You can also reach out to Susan, our moderator, or us via the chat. For those of you, again, that are in the virtual audience. So a follow up to that point you just made, Claire, though, is there, and this is to both of you, Mansell and Claire, has EPA done anything to help direct or any guidance with the ARP funds as far as dealing with underserved communities in the impoverished areas?
Here's the other nice part that I didn't quite get to before the 30 minutes came up, because there's a lot to cover here. Within the ARP, the American Rescue Plan, EPA is allocated $100 million exclusively to work in poverty communities and poverty schools on a range of different things. They've got specific authorizations they need to fulfill. One is on indoor air under the Clean Air Act. The other is Safe Drinking Water Act. The other is CERCLA, that's hazardous waste. And then under energy policy, diesel reduction. So they have very specific deliverables here that they can work on both with local communities and with states, tied to very specific EPA deliverables. So that makes it, but we don't know yet exactly, we have ideas, but we don't know yet exactly how they're going to administer or allocate that 100 million. Our advice has been that they use a fair amount to do competitive grants with the states to work on indoor air. That would be a great use of it. The other is to work with community organizations, universities, and other groups to work specifically around indoor air, cleaning and disinfecting issues, and other things directly related to the pandemic. I think there's some great things they could do with it. It also would give EPA a platform, we think, to kind of, because it's the indoor air program has been so short of funding for so long. This gives it a great opportunity to sort of step up again and refresh and relaunch what they're doing in the area, which I think would be incredibly useful.
I do want to remind people that the last administration did diminish some of those programs in terms of clean water and clean air. There was kind of a sad state that those things happen and they just use lame jargon. Yeah.
Yep. Inside it's a mess. So CDC. Inside it's a mess.
Peter from our studio audience has a question. I believe you're unmuted.
Yes, I think I am. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, Peter, just want you to tell us your background or just kind of introduce yourself in one sentence if you could.
Okay, well, I'm sort of hoping to get into the field, and my interest has been primarily energy saving, but I kind of got sidetracked into the concept of indoor air quality, and part of the reason is that I've discovered that I'm building up some more problems with allergies, and I think I'm giving myself some of these problems through my ventilation system, which just happens to be a air heat exchanger. And I think that the defrost, when it goes into defrost, the airflows change in the ducting, and I believe that I'm seeding myself and the whole house to molds. But so that's an aside, but the main thing is this new ASHRAE recommendation of 4 to 6 air changes per hour. That seems totally off the charts. That just doesn't make sense. It's just far too much, I think.
Well, okay, so I'll try and defend that. In fact, I got calls early and it actually had risen to 20 air changes per hour. Their goal was, what can we do to make the indoor like the outdoor? That if you're going to take your classroom outside, it's a nice day and comfortable, that would be a great place to do that if everybody could hear the instructor. So that would be one of the safest environments with a little bit of distance. So like, how can we make inside more like outside? So they wanted to just figure out what could they do to increase that without making it the worst energy penalty or even achievable at all. So I've done a lot of calculations. The 6 is achievable, and it becomes more achievable if you combine it with other technologies. Like, let's figure out a way to get more fresh air in, and let's mix the air, which is a pretty cheap thing with some fans facing to the walls. And let's also add some HEPA purification standalone. So those 3 things combined can give you that technically, 6 air changes per hour. Even 4 is better than what you've got. 3 is better than what you probably had. So anything you do is an improvement. So it sounded crazy in the beginning, but it didn't take long for me to start calculating. This really is not a difficult thing to achieve. And one thing I do remind people that we think COVID is winding down. COVID will be like the flu. There'll be COVID seasons where we have regular COVID shots, like flu shots. COVID is going to hit parts of our country for a long time. That these are things that are going to come and go. It's forever and done. These are things we're going to figure out how to keep doing regularly in our schools and our environments.
See, that raises a question, though. Peter raised an issue, of the energy concern versus the indoor environmental quality, and that's like the whole. I think my whole tenure in the industry, the last 35 years, there always seemed to be this. You'd always see the scales of justice, right? The balancing between indoor air quality and energy, and I don't think we're at a point anymore where we can have that. We can't keep saying, well, we can't afford to have good indoor environmental quality because there's an energy penalty. I think that ship sailed. We do have to be concerned about the quality of our indoor environments. And I think schools, are one of those places where it's just been pushed off for way too many years.
Well, let's accept there's a cost to have good, fresh, I use that quotes, fresh air in our houses and our environments. There's just a cost for that. It's not free. Nothing's free. So we just need to accept that it actually is. When you look at the ERVs, HRVs, and these little portable things, they use a fraction of energy. It really is pretty shocking at how well you could ventilate a house or environment for a fraction of what your normal heating
With the new ECM motors and things like that that are
right.
very,
it has become energy efficient in theory. So yeah.
Well, what about the condition of the building? If the building isn't less than pristine, super clean conditions, if you're turning up the airflow through the building, is there not a chance that you'll be exacerbating problems like moving mold around and so on?
Mansell, I want to give that to Mansell because you also have potential lead issues in some of your environments. Can you talk about some of the things you're trying to do with the building structure itself to make those better facilities?
Well, things like asbestos, lead, other contaminants are certainly a problem. However, if you're bringing in more outside air and if you're filtering air, you're eliminating a lot of those additional contaminants. And of course, I don't advocate ventilation and ignore everything else. You've got to take care of the building. You've got to do moisture control, leading to mold control. You've got to invest in the structure, eliminate peeling paint and all of those things. In addition to also increasing ventilation. But the purpose in ventilation is to reduce the exposure of people to the various air pollutants. And I would encourage us to think of it as an investment, that making this investment, we're investing in our children, we're investing in their academic success, we are investing in teachers that are healthier and more able to effectively teach. So I'd like to think of it as, you mentioned HRVs, those are heat recovery ventilators. I've had some schools that I've worked with had, it significantly improves air quality while dropping the cost of improving the air quality. So there are technologies where you can achieve both. And with the investment money that's available now, I would definitely recommend investing in systems like the heat recovery ventilators and the ERVs, energy recovery ventilators, to both achieve better air quality as well as reduce energy costs. Because we're also working on climate change issues and recognize that energy usage also degrades our climates and our quality as well. So we definitely want to balance.
Terry from our audience made a comment in the chat that I think is worth noting, especially with schools, that bringing in more outside air in certain environments. The outside environment does not necessarily mean clean air. We tend to take that to mean that it's better air than indoors, and that's it's the case much of the time in the United States. But there's a lot of areas, urban areas with agricultural activities going on, where maybe the outside air isn't all that great either. So bringing in more without having the capacity for proper filtration and cleaning of that air is not necessarily going to improve things. Susan Valenti, our editor's got a question here. So Susan, you going to come on camera?
Yep, hold on. I have a question for Claire. Claire, in the first half, you talked about how there's still no school environmental tracking. There's no agencies doing it. There's no group. If you had to pinpoint an agency or a group that should do it, what would that be?
I think that's a real tough question. I think right now, what we would love to see is EPA take the lead in establishing an interagency task force on school facilities and kind of wrestle with some of these really tough questions, because indoor air has been a problem for such a long time, and literally everything that happens from the design to construction, the engineering, the maintenance of the building to where it's located are going to affect indoor air. So I think there needs to be some sort of kind of top-down look at it. And every time you look at schools and you look at what they're trying to accomplish, you're dealing with multiple agencies. You're dealing with labor, you're dealing with education, you're dealing with health, you're dealing with energy, you're dealing with the Environment Agency.
And local
Emergency
has their
management.
authority. Yeah.
I think there needs to be a tracking system on school facilities within the states. That is one proposal that came up under a different bill called the Rebuild America Schools Act, is for states to develop a tracking and reporting system on school facilities. And that would happen within the education field. But I think what you decide to track and report needs to come from EPA and maybe from energy, maybe from occupational health. So I think there are a number of ways to take a look at this, but it's going to take a lot of work. I don't think what I'm saying is there's no easy answer here.
Well, I'm a bottom-up person. I really
with
think that we need to look at principals. Principals are responsible for the operation of their building, the safety of their children. When I go into a building, that's who I report out to, principals. And I know that principals are not educated in these matters.
Right.
Every principal I've talked to does not understand air quality. So I devote my energy to educating kids, teachers, and principals, because that's where we can really affect the change. And one of the problems that we have with ventilation is it's not visible. We can measure distances, we can measure number of students with masks on, but we can't really easily, without some kind of instrumentation, understand what's going on with air quality. One of the instruments I use is a carbon dioxide meter. And I've used that to explain to principals, teachers, students, what's going on in their air and how they can quickly make a preliminary assessment of what's going on by looking at carbon dioxide levels. And that really changes the game when you're able to give a metric that people can look to.
I mean, that certainly gives them the ability to at least get some sort of a numerical representation of, maybe what's happening on a ventilation standpoint in this space. So that's pretty important. What about, we hear ventilation, and I think ventilation is key here. So just let me preface what I'm about to say, that I really do believe that we're dealing with an airborne virus, as far as the pandemic, and as far as having, enhanced ventilation, enhanced filtration, that's critical. What about cleaning and disinfecting in our indoor environments, though, especially in schools? So, how should we be doing that? Are we doing it right? Are we doing it wrong? What can we do better?
Well, right now, everybody's doing it over too much. That's wrong. Overuse is as bad as not use. What we've gone back to, the original guidance from CDC, is they assumed the transmission was surface contact, and it turns out the transmission is air. But they've still left cleaning and disinfecting as a priority, and not listed ventilation as a priority. So it's adding to the confusion within schools. So getting that fixed might be helpful. We've gone back to what New York State published back during H1N1. I published a joint memo from the health department and the education department about basic cleaning and disinfecting for the flu. And it's just really simple. And it's really easy to take a look at. And it's simple for people to follow. It does talk about hard surfaces, and we've encouraged people to, go back to a plain program. Don't talk about enhanced cleaning and fogging and spraying and covering everything. It's important for people to realize, I'm sure your group does. I'm sure people who are in your live audience here.
You're making an assumption that I don't think you should make here.
But cleaning and disinfecting are two separate processes. You have to clean before you apply the disinfectant.
Yes, absolutely.
And when you're applying a fogger, you're not doing that. And the disinfectants don't clean because they can't cut through the lipid layer of the virus. They don't have surfactants. So
we've had a lot of great discussions on that, and some of the top quality experts on that. The one thing that came out of every discussion was that regular soap that you use to clean your hands or even your dishes can be just as effective as any of this other things we were buying.
Soap combined with microfiber is what I always recommend. And some of the Bureau of Indian Affairs schools have actually gone to microfiber, and when you're using microfiber, you can use less toxic cleaners. COVID is scary, and so people think they need the most toxic, the strongest that you can possibly use, but it's actually the other way around. COVID is relatively easy to destroy,
break down.
as Claire
Yeah.
referred to. Soap and water does great.
Yeah, it's a
We
to-
don't
it's a
need
total
these
misnomer,
toxic
yeah.
cleaners.
And that's a misconception everybody's had, right? You know, having it being an enveloped virus, it actually does shatter quite readily just with a surfactant. You know, but see, that goes back to the whole thing of, you know, why are we fogging the indoor environments? Why was that ever a directive anyway? You know, if we're dealing with airborne well, I get that. I'm asking the question rhetorically. You know, if we're dealing with airborne transmission, right? The vector, you know, is really the person-to-person contact. So, you know, fogging a space, as soon as you bring the occupants back in, have you done anything?
So I asked Susan to dig
you
up.
poison
go
the
ahead, Claire.
air.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right, yes.
you know, you can't
Well,
kill
you
the
have done that,
airborne
yeah.
virus, right?
Yeah, but it's also now compromised. The area you cleaned is no longer clean, so it's a catch-22. But you clean it every night because the next day it's only clean until somebody comes in the room. So
It's only clean until the next hand covered with peanut butter and jelly touches the surface, right?
And the thing is, that's not to say there isn't some value in prudent use of, you know, sanitizing procedures in a space, because it's not all just, you know, I guess if we're just talking about SARS-CoV-2, okay, maybe that's not so valuable. But I mean, there are other contaminants that we actually can, you know, bacterial contaminants and stuff that some form of moderate sanitizing of high contact surfaces does make sense, I think.
but these can apply to flu seasons. Right in the past, some whole schools or school systems have been like shut down due to a pandemic of flu in their area. So there are some lessons to be learned about just transfer of these types of viruses and diseases. So there's a learning curve here. So yeah. I did ask
one of the things I want to share before we get, I want to share the schematics that Harvard produced out of Joe Allen's office with the New York Times about what happens when you open a window in a classroom. This was the New York Times front page of St. Patrick's Day, March 7th.
Yes, that's what I was trying to lead into.
Yep, they're fabulous.
Okay, so I'm going to criticize it on a technical level, and that is that many of the people that are in our industry says not all classrooms have 20-foot ceilings with a nice window up high. They didn't talk about opening the door. They didn't talk about you know, what's actually happening with one little purifier in the room. So they made it seem as though there's an easy solution here. Just open a window, put a fan in the window.
You know, I appreciate what you're saying, Joe. I didn't read it that way. I read it that it was really a practical approach to explaining to people what happens. And you could open a different window and get a different pattern of infected aerosolized particles. You could open a different window, you could open a door, you could put the air cleaner in a different place. The idea was to show people what happened, because we get a phone call like, which window should I open? Well, can you open any of them? You know, can you open a door? Oh, should I open a door? I mean, just the most basic level of non-understanding that
it did provide that. That's right.
Right.
And I get that, Claire. I agree with you on that. I think it does do that, but the problem is that also, because people, you're pushing that out to a large constituency out there, right? You know, the general public that doesn't really understand those nuances. You know, and we, you know, as professionals, we can sit here and bash around on that because we understand a lot of the technical aspects of these things and how, you know, slight variances in positioning and airflows and everything changes. But, you know, but to like you said, Claire, to your point, a consumer is like, well, which window should we open? Should it be that middle one like they did in the illustration? It's like, it depends. You know, it's not that simple.
Right.
But they're illustrating the point that they're, at least I think the good point, Joe, that I would say to that New York Times illustration is that it at least allows a general consumer to visualize, to at least grasp, understand the concept of how things, you know, the air fluid dynamics of what's going on maybe in a space a little bit.
I think it terrified every teacher that saw that.
Schematics. I mean, there were 3 on the front page, but this is a whole series of schematics. Right. So I think you have to, anyway. I just liked it because it started to simplify what was going on.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, Tim, sure.
Yeah, hi, I don't want to interrupt, but I have one theme that I see that I think is, or one thing to say that I think is helpful in terms of balancing energy and indoor air quality and to address the issues that the technical issues that you're raising about, is the air quality good on an ongoing basis in different rooms or different parts of rooms. I'm up in Massachusetts. I know a school, it's a small campus, 55 monitors are placed around these different buildings. Some of the buildings are new. They have very good HVAC systems. Some of the buildings are old with horrible no ventilation. So the consultant has had these monitors in. They're monitoring temperature, humidity, CO2, VOCs, and particulate matter. The critical ones, what the engineering company is able to do is balance the energy consumption by looking at the temperature and looking at the CO2 levels on an ongoing basis, and then adjusting the ventilation system and literally opening and closing windows more or less based on, CO2 levels and temperature. So if you don't need to have the window open that much, the CO2 level is showing, under 600 ppm, for example, then you can close the window and save a little energy, or you can turn down the HVAC system. But I'm stressing that ongoing monitoring is relatively inexpensive, and ongoing monitoring really gives people the reassurance and the feedback, the knowledge that they need to simply manage the facilities as best they can with the resources that they have.
Yeah, what's your background? Briefly describe to the group.
I'm sorry. I come from an energy background. By the way, I tried to turn on my video, but I couldn't. And when I tried to, there we go. There we go. Okay. Hi. I'm in Boston. So my background is I'm the principal of an energy company called ACE Energy Services up here. We in Massachusetts has a stretch code, i.e. That is most all the communities you have to have a HERS rating done, if you know what a HERS rating is. And so we work for hundreds of builders, and we certify hundreds of single family and multifamily homes that they meet the Massachusetts energy code, stretch code. And so I do that, but we install air source heat pump systems and ventilation systems, and we do indoor air quality monitoring. So
I want to touch on the monitors briefly because
sure,
there are a lot of cheap monitors out there. There's things that you can just kind of throw on the wall in your classroom, and it's only monitoring kind of the wall in the classroom. It's one of the challenges, but if for not much money, you can actually get one in each room. They recommend maybe every other room that's similar for around $500. That gives you reset certified information, and Aware makes those, and you can go up from there to something that's around $1,000 that talks to each other. The school systems that I've worked with or talked to, they have issues with Wi-Fi. They don't want their Wi-Fi to be bogged down. They have privacy issues. So all those things increase your cost, but you're right. Those things can be standalone or they can integrate with your system. And I do think you can't see what's going on. As Mansell mentioned, he has a CO2 monitor, and you can't see those things. You maybe experience it when it's high, but you need to see the invisible. So I do think that schools need to have investments in those kind of conditions.
We have another question from the audience too. Josephine, we're going to get you unmuted here.
Hi, yeah. Hey, everybody. My name is Josie. I work for ITEP also, and I'm actually working on a indoor air quality course for Mansell, writing the course for warm climates. But I was wondering about providing educational materials, not necessarily so that a child could do it, but, so that a child could do it, like so that somebody with maybe a 4th grade education could read through some very simple instructions and go through and figure out, which risks are there, and then also go through and figure out which risks they could possibly address with using really simple solutions like this is a really, kind of a not very effective method, but, perhaps even getting something like a UVC light that they sell for, nail salons and putting it in their HVAC system so that, some of the particles are disabled or killed before, the viral particles are recirculated in the air. Just very, very simple solutions. And then, teaching people how to be proactive and identifying the risks to their own personal health so that they're not only more safety conscious, but that's also so that they can speak for themselves about, what they're being exposed to and not just be passive participants as professionals come in and tell them, dictate to them what they have to do.
My only quick comment before Bob jumps in there is that anything you're going to add to your ventilation strategy, I don't think a fourth grader or even a college educated person understands UVC very well, but find the third party evidence that it does something, because everybody's after shiny objects when there's so many other cheaper solutions that actually are much more effective. So it works great in a hospital environment. There are other studies that don't prove exactly that it has enough time to be exposed in some of the systems that schools have. Air is blowing too fast for some of this stuff. So don't grab onto the web, junk that's out there. Find third-party evidence about what you're going to spend your money on in a school.
Oh yeah, that wasn't a suggestion to go get a little nail drying light, and
Sure.
but it's an example. Like
Well,
I think that might be effective if you just brought in a portable closet and put it in a portable closet and had ultra low flow, where the air was sucked into there and exhausted from there. That might.
There's a
I
company
think the
called
suggestion
Wind.
about fourth grade reading level is right on track. I really
Yeah.
do.
That's really
And
my point.
whether you do it on, with a schematic and some simple text, which makes it visually easy to understand, which I think is, one of the things that I liked about the New York Times front page piece is, maybe you take a bunch of those and you line them up in different ways. But I think appealing to making sure it is so understandable to everybody, whether they're a homeowner or a small office or a large school building, makes a lot of sense.
Well, that's key, right? I mean, you have to distill, there's great research out there. This is a problem in the indoor environmental industry. This is not just a school issue. This is an issue in the industry. There's great research that happens usually in a silo away from the practitioner side, and all of that happens away from the end consumers, both commercial and professional, our residential consumers. And we don't do a really good job at disseminating this information in an understandable or actionable fashion. We are at that time where Joe is going to ask the final round question of our two guests, and I'm going to let you do that.
I'll make one simple comment though, that energy is easily tracked. Indoor air quality is not. There's so many variables. It's not like, I can determine how much energy I use for something. So there is a whole different education that goes along with that. So Claire, I'll start with you. So, what's the one advice you want to give to anybody listening that either goes to school, has kids that go to schools, or is a principal? What's the one resource or thing you should say, there's lots of things to focus on, but if you started here, you probably would have great success in the end.
Well, I think there are different questions at different levels. We are telling parents and community members to ask their school for their plan in writing to address indoor air. Part of dealing with the pandemic, the national health crisis, is for schools to have infection prevention and control plans, which is something that we've been working on for a while. And the first question is, give us a written statement of what you're doing. What is your policy on indoor air? What are you doing about it? Put it in writing. Let us know what's happening. A telephone conversation doesn't guarantee anything is happening. Schools are public agencies. They have locally elected boards. They are public works entities. You have every right as a taxpayer or as a parent, anybody in the community, to ask a question and expect an answer. Particularly in a pandemic, which is airborne, we want them to know what's happening with indoor air. Ask in writing.
Before I ask my last question to Nelson, I want to ask the audience. Bob and I are debating about doing a Tuesday night event once a month. similar to the other things you may find at BS&B or a Passive House. So if you're interested in something like that, give us some information in the chat. We'd love to get your feedback if that's something you would want to participate in. So Mansell, you're up. Why don't you tell us about, what are things that you're recommending? And you guys talk about your hot climates, your challenge with funding. So what are some of your best recommendations do you try to give to your group?
Well, I think the money is out there now. It's available and decisions need to be made. Investments in a healthy school structure. So we need to recognize that we need to make investments in our buildings. And then the other aspect that I really focus on is educating everyone. I call it my breathing curriculum. As has already been stated, everyone needs to understand a little bit about air quality and in particular indoor quality. But I challenge you to find curriculums anywhere in our schools that really do a good job of air quality generally and indoor quality specifically. And that's one of the areas I think that if we can educate everyone, and in particular our school staff, our administrators, the teachers on these issues, that can take us a long ways, combined with a little bit of understanding about some metrics, being able to make some measurements, I think can help a lot if everybody understands. If you have a 6th grade student sitting in a classroom that's not adequately ventilated, and that 6th grader can say to his teacher, I think we need to look at the ventilation in this room. I think that's very realistic. I think we can get students to that point where they understand air quality well enough to advocate for themselves.
I can remember as a kid having to do exercises about energy. I was around where Carter and others were trying to do coloring and exercise, find the things in the house that could use more energy and all that kind of stuff. And I think that we need to now change that language to what's in your environment. And those lessons last forever. Kids remember those things as part of their lifestyle. So I think if we could embed them with the concept that their home could be impacting their health or their environment impacts their health, only resonates for the rest of their life. So that's a great cause that I think we all should be pushing.
Yeah, I mean, that clearly, I think would be very beneficial. And, that would be one of the positive things that could come from this past year plus of this global pandemic. I think it's critical that we take this opportunity to, to push things forward. I mean, the discussion about our indoor environments is on the table now, right? It's, not necessarily by choice, but by just necessity. So I think it's important that we don't just let this potential momentum slip and we take it forward. What I'd like to do is, we're in our wrap up mode here. Joe Medosh, tell us a little bit about what you guys do at Hayward Score and why that would be of interest.
Yeah, so I'm a healthy building scientist with Hayward Score. We have a free online survey tool for anybody to learn if their home is impacting their health or you're really in your environment. You kind of could expand it, but it asks you questions about your home, your habits, and your symptomology. So all those things get combined to a score with some advice on what you could do to improve your environment. So it's free, haywardscore.com, and we appreciate your time today.
So I'll do my shameless plug for Healthy Indoors at this point. So we are a multimedia company. We do a lot of things. Obviously, in addition to this show, Healthy Indoors magazine, the USA edition, is a monthly digital publication. It's free to anyone, free anywhere. That's something that you should be taking a look at if you're working in anywhere in this indoor environmental space or have any interest in things going on there. It's available. You can get to it at healthyindoors.com. That's where all of our stuff is located. I can actually bring that right up here. Healthyindoors.com is our mothership home base, where you can really pretty much find everything we're doing. The magazine, all the back issues are there. The Healthy Indoors Show, all of our back episodes and our audio podcast, along with a whole bunch of resources that are available there. And one other thing I'd like to point out is that we actually are launching what's known as the Healthy Indoors Global Community, which will be an online platform that'll allow people to network and discuss and learn more about these indoor environmental topics all around the planet. And that's something you can find out more about by going to our Healthy Indoors site and clicking on the community community button. That'll take you there and show you a little bit about what we're up to. But we'll be doing a lot more with the community, live streaming these types of shows to it, and encouraging people to share and reach out to each other for information. So I guess I would like to also show the Healthy Schools Network website again. That's at healthyschools.org, right, Claire?
Right, that's the National Healthy Schools Day portal. And you look down at the bottom of the page, there are little buttons there to take a look at. There's some social media, there are free resources to take a look at, and a way to register a supporting quote about clean air in every school, or register a small activity. Whether you're doing social media or you're launching some of your own or repurposing some of your own work on indoor air, it's a good time to do it and get a message out. We'd be happy to know about it and list it as a continuing activity. Thanks.
Excellent.
Thank
Excellent.
you.
So, and again, you can get to that at healthyschools.org. That's where the site is that Claire just mentioned. So, yeah, it's that time again, right? It's that wonderful time to
Wait 1 second. I do want to acknowledge Susan did a fantastic job in the background. I appreciate your efforts of trying to keep us informed of the links and the topics. So that I think made a major difference, and we're trying to improve all that. And if you have other stuff to contribute in the future, please don't hesitate to post that stuff. So thank you.
And
Susan.
we're thanking Alex Nadeau, who just signed in for us. He's our National Healthy Schools Day coordinator and program manager for Healthy Schools Network. Thanks.
So with that, like to thank our guests again today, Claire Barnett and Mansell Nelson. Thanks so very much for joining us, as well as all of you in our live virtual studio audience. Thanks so much for taking time out of your busy day to come here and be part of our program and help participate. We'll be back next week. We have a great show coming up next week as well. We'll be joined by Vinny Lebdell. He's the president of Healthway and also co-founder of IntelliPure. And we're going to be talking about air purification and air cleaning and indoor environmental. And Vinny's been in this space a long time. He's a global manufacturer of products and some very unique technologies. But he's been looking at it, from the clean room aspects all the way to dealing with residences and just common general spaces. So that should be a great discussion. And then the following week, I'll jump to that. Susan will be happy to report on it. We have Bud Offerman, Glenn Morrison, and Tom Licker. These guys will be coming in, and our discussion is going to be predicated on Bud Offerman's paper that he released a while back. When did that come out, Susan? His white paper. Bud's paper. That was.
It was actually just like a month or so ago.
So
but then,
basically,
but actually, Glenn Morrison's paper was actually done in 2018. On basically the same topic. So.
Yeah, and the topic is just so we can elaborate on it. It was like basically snake oil in the indoor environmental industry. So this is going to be an interesting discussion because we're going to have some researchers, a consultant, and actually a practitioner from the space. And I'm not saying it's going to be a cage match, but we'll see how it goes. I'm really looking forward to that one as well. So. For the Healthy Indoor Show and all our guests and support staff, Joe Maddosh, Susan Valenti, I'm Bob Krell. We'll see you next week, same bat time, same bat channel here on the Healthy Indoors live show, Thursdays from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern. Until then, please stay safe